What's up, guys? Welcome back to another video. Experimenting with camera angles right now. Very technical, I know. I thought hoodie season was over, but fortunately it's not. We're back, baby. A few months ago, I made a pretty thorough video on extroversion. What is extroversion, and what are the differences between an extrovert and an introvert, technically speaking. And that pertained to myers-briggs as well as Big Five theory, because they are the same thing, just sort of conceptualized differently. So that video was really meant to get at the core of what extroversion is, in a way that applies to both systems and as well as any casual use of the term, because it is often a misused term. Introversion, extroversion, its connotations are not always indicative of the actual definitions, right? But today, something a little more related to Myers-Briggs specifically, and that is the differences between sensing types and intuitive types. So, by the way, it's Mercury Retrograde right now. It starts today, I think. My advice on that is don't worry about it. Okay. Just carry on, man. It's not... Dude, it happens like twice a year, You'll make it. Just, if indeed things do, thinking slows down during this period as a result of Mercury slowing down its rotation around the sun, just take more time to think about things and to make decisions. But don't not make a decision on the basis that it's Mercury retrograde. Just, be a little more meticulous if you're feeling some kind of way. Okay. It's my only advice. Anyway, the difference between sensing types and intuitive types. Technically speaking, a myers-briggs type is not really defined by the letters, those four letters themselves, but rather by the four cognitive functions in the particular order that they're in of your particular type. So I'm an INTP. My functions are introverted thinking, extroverted intuition, introverted sensing, extroverted feeling, in that order, top to bottom, dominant to inferior. Okay. So if all you know about your Myers-Briggs type is your four letters, I charge you to go out and make sure, first of all, that you have the right type assigned to you. And the only way to really do this is to figure out the cognitive functions of your type and just read them and decide for yourself if that applies to you or not. That's the best way. It's better than any test that you can take, okay? A quick and dirty way to do this is whatever type you think you are, if there's still any uncertainty about it at all, go to a search engine, image search, and type, say if you're an ISFJ, type in ISFJ sarcastic functions. And it's going to bring up a nice little, animation of, 4 blocks with little symbols on them and a quick and dirty and kind of funny description of your cognitive functions. If that applies to you, if it makes you laugh, it's probably your type, okay? So anyway, again, what Myers-Briggs does is give us some insight into our modes of perception and judgment. That's it. That's really where the extent of insight of Myers-Briggs ends, is the modes of perception and judgment. Okay? So there are 8 cognitive functions, 4 of which correspond to your type, but in a unique order from the rest of the types. All right? So technically speaking, if you are a sensing type, you have a sensing function, which is a function of perception in either your first or second position, the dominant or the auxiliary position, okay? That function is either going to be introverted sensing or extroverted sensing, right? If you're an intuitive type, conversely, one of your first 2 functions, dominant or auxiliary, are going to be intuitive functions, introverted or extroverted, okay? So Depending on which position your perception function is in, and which judging function in particular it is paired with in those first two functions. That's your axis, right? Your main mode of functioning, of perception and judgment, is your first two functions, your number one perception function and your number one judging function. That is going to tell you about how you take in information, right? Perception is all about input, taking in information. Judgment is about processing it, right? So I'm not going to go into too much detail about the differences between introverted sensing and extroverted sensing, introverted intuition and extroverted intuition in this video. Just giving you general differences between sensation and intuition, right? So let's look at those words. What does sensation mean? Well, the core word is sense, right? So what you want to think of is sense data. What you're taking in as a sensing type, the type of information, comes mainly through your sense data. If you're an intuitive type, it's more intuitive. It's more abstract. It's less detail oriented. And if it is, it's still abstract. It works within an a priori system, like logic or mathematics or something like that. But you're less concerned as an intuitive type with sense data, with things that you can see, touch, taste, smell, all right? Than you are with conceptual systems and processes. So sensing types tend to be, not always, but tend to be more detail oriented. And they want tangible evidence for things. They want a straightforward approach that their senses can conceive of in order to understand a concept. So very often, these people are not, they're not going to be as interested, generally speaking, in ideas themselves, in concepts. They may not even be that interested in spirituality, but they may be religious, right? So sensing types, the information that they take in generally comes through the senses, whereas for an intuitive type, it is more abstract. It has to fit within some sort of conceptual a priori structure, if that makes sense. Now, so I mentioned the ideas thing. There is a correlation here. Intuitives are higher in Big Five trait openness than sensing types are, specifically in the intellect section, the intellect aspect of openness. So openness is divided between openness to ideas / intellect and openness to experience. There's no correlation at all between your myers-briggs type and openness to experience. Both sensation types and intuitive types can be equally high or low in that dimension, in openness to experience proper. But they still have different ways of processing their experience. Again, sensing types are more interested in experiencing things in a sensation-based way. Whereas for intuitive types, roughly speaking, they're more interested in maybe what they learn on the basis of those experiences, or maybe doing something to be able to say that they did, to be able to tell a story about it, or to take a lesson from it. They may have some ulterior motive for wanting to experience new things, if that makes sense. Whereas a sensing type is good at being present. I find that they're much better at not overthinking things. Intuitives are kind of prone to overthinking things, more so than sensation types. So sensing types can stay present and just experience things in the moment, experience how something feels and looks to them and smells and tastes, whatever it is that we're talking about. They're good at staying present and paying attention to the details of that experience, whereas intuitives may have some ulterior motive for being there, you know? So intuitives are overall higher in openness because they're higher in the intellect side of openness. They're more interested in ideas. They tend to be more less, not always more grounded in the way they're thinking. I think that sensing types are actually more grounded in a lot of cases, but maybe more grounded in understanding deeper and broader perspectives of a matter. Whereas a sensing type just wants the information and wants a pragmatic, sort of application for it. An intuitive type is more interested in the ideas themselves, in learning for its own sake. That's what intellect really is. And for, having knowledge. And usually impressing people in that way, Intuitives tend to be, maybe more witty, more banter oriented in a social context rather than action oriented. A sensation type may bond with you over like doing something, like more physical activity, or something involving the body, something involving the senses, even if it is like going out to eat, to fine dining or something like that. But an intuitive is more likely to want to bond with you through sharing of perspectives and ideas. So, of course, I'm speaking in generalities here. We have to speak in generalities about anything to make sense of anything. That's how we communicate, right? So, look, even the most intuitive of intuitives still has a sensing function that's in the tertiary or inferior position, the third or fourth, point in their functional stack. But it's generally not their main way of taking in information, is through the senses. They mainly appeal to conceptual structures first, and then consider sense data details second. In their, in the processing phase, or perhaps, like, say, in my case, I have introverted sensing in my tertiary position. It's not really something that affects my work, my intellectual and creative pursuits that much, but it is sort of a pastime, I would regard that tertiary function position as maybe like a pastime, a hobby level of interaction, or application. So introverted sensing has this like deep nostalgic quality to it. So some music that I listen to, some things that I like to read or watch in my pastime, if I'm just like unwinding, are related to my past, are related, they bring up a sort of nostalgic sense in me, right? That's based in memory, that's based in some images, which is, sense data that I had taken in a long time ago. And there's just sort of an energy that comes along with that's maybe appropriate for whatever it is I'm doing at the time. So, and then conversely, even the most sensing of sensors aren't, devoid of intuitive ability. Of course, that's ridiculous. They still have an intuitive function in their tertiary or inferior position. And again, they can still employ that if needed, if it's well developed, in their work, in their, communication with other people, any creative endeavors that they have, etc. But it's less about making the idea itself the main focus, making the abstraction the main focus. They still want things a little more straightforward, they want things more simple, and I mean that in a positive way. I know some brilliant artists and very creative and interesting people who are, sensing types, although I do tend mostly to connect with intuitives because I'm very intuitive as an INTP. But generally speaking, sensing types do tend to see the world more simply because they see it in terms of sense data, right? Rather than the infinitely complex ways that we can see certain things. And you know, that's why intuitives are so prone to overthinking, right? Is because they do see complexity in things. And that's real. Everything is infinitely simple and infinitely complex, right? But you have to aim your perception and the way you make judgments about the information that you're taking in, the way you process things. You have to aim that toward, you know, some intention or some goal. And so you have to find the right balance between simplicity and complexity in order to achieve the right result in the end. And that's ultimately why, you know, people, everyone has a different personality type and a different, you know, style with which they go about, you know, processing information and communicating and making sense of things and contributing their unique skills to the world, is because we need more simple perceptive people and more you know, complex perceptive people working together to find, you know, what works in any given scenario. So yeah, I don't mean anything, you know, disrespectful by that, but it is just a fact. I mean, sensing people do tend to see things a little more simply, intuitive, but you know, there's good and bad to that. They don't think more deeply sometimes when they should, but because they tend to be more, I guess, grounded in a way, that simplicity can bring results forth, whereas an intuitive may get stuck in an overthinking rut, you know, because they're overwhelmed with you know, too much information, because intuitives see, you know, very often the ultimate complexity of reality and don't know what to do with that information, you know, and oftentimes value trying to learn the truth about something, or even if they're not truth oriented, just trying to understand something for themselves before you know, prioritizing actually moving forward and doing something with it, where, you know, there's some things that need to be learned along the way, you know, and I think sensing types are good at that. They're good at the trial and error, as long as they have like a good mindset and attitude and everything about life, and self-growth. Then their sensing types are maybe more likely to, you know, kind of jump in both feet and learn from their mistakes and know not to go there again. Whereas an intuitive is going to, you know, sit there and spend a lot of time thinking when sometimes you need to just act, you know. So anyway, that's my video on sensing and intuitive types. Just some general differences. Hope you enjoyed it. See you in the next video. Cheers.